We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is May 3rd, 2016. We are already into May now. Time goes by really fast, it seems. And we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and SoundCloud, as well as the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we're happy to hear from you. And you can reach us by phone at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you can Skype into the show. The username is Nonpartisan Liberty for all one word. Just send a contact request and your name and what you'd like to talk about. So I guess breaking news, I guess the first time we've had breaking news, because I don't really, I call it, I guess, a news and political show. At least that's the label I give it because it's the closest to what I guess the show is about. But we cover news as needed, really. It's more about ideas and things like that. But tonight, the primary in Indiana took place, and Donald Trump has won that and essentially is going to get the nomination for the Republican Party for president. Ted Cruz announced that he is suspending his campaign. So I heard Trump's speech, and it's like every other fucking speech that he's done. It's his arrogant, we have to win again, and in trade we got to win again, and in ISIS we got to win again, and this country's got to win again, and we're going to make this country great again, so we'll win again. And it's just the same bullshit that is really in every speech. It's like catchphrases or something. I don't know if that's just him doing that, off the cuff, that's or, it's not a written speech. He just comes out there and says what he says. I would hope, because it sounds pretty bad. If somebody's writing that shit for him, then he has a terrible writer. But I heard he had issues with teleprompters. And unfortunately, Peter King, the representative from New York, is not going to take cyanide. He said he would take cyanide if Ted Cruz got the nomination. And he's a real dick who believes, like most congressmen do, of course, that he has the right to invade your privacy and violate all your rights, and that they need to do all these things to protect you against Al-Qaeda and ISIS and terrorism in general, that they need to do that by spying on you and violating all your rights. And that's really what we'll be talking about tonight. There's a couple stories that I do want to cover before we get to that, but really what we'll be talking about is all the surveillance, all the spying, all the tracking, and where it's going, and how it's leading to the government controlling every aspect of your life. And we've talked about this before, but not really in a sense of just putting everything together. I originally wasn't going to do a show tonight. I was going to take the night off, but I decided to do one last minute. And so I'm not as prepared as I'd like to be, but this is something that I'm pretty familiar with anyway when it comes to all the things that they're doing. And the reason I had thought of it was because what they're doing with pills now, and we'll get into that a little later, how they're able to track pills through technology within the pill. And that's kind of scary. Not kind of scary, it's very scary. All the technology that they have is scary because what they're using it for. Of course, technology can be a positive thing. I mean, it can be used in a way that helps people in so many different ways, depending on what the technology is. But when you have the government developing a lot of this technology or investing in it, where they have their front companies or they're donating money, so they're involved in a lot of the stuff, or they're buying up patents, whatever it might be, and they're essentially claiming rights to all this stuff anyway, if they want to. Anything that is developed in the United States, I mean, they can do whatever they want with it. If they want to take it and use it for national security purposes, that's really all they got to do, is claim national security. But what I want to do is play this clip about the pills. It's actually pretty short. And then I'm going to play a clip on the top 10 secret places you can't go that has to do with secret, I guess, government storage facilities and beyond. So we're going to play that. And when we come back, I'm going to go through some of the stories that I've been wanting to go through. And then we'll get into all the ways that the government is tracking people, and the pills now being a new way among other ways, and things that you could possibly do about it. And none of them have anything to do with the government, of course. The system is gone. It's done. It doesn't matter who gets elected. It's all rigged. So having Trump in there, he definitely made a deal with the powers that be. Although I believe Hillary made a deal to actually become the next president. So I think that is going to be the next president, but it doesn't matter who ends up winning. Whoever ends up winning, we're fucked. It's totally irrelevant, and neither give a shit about freedom. And if you listen to what they say, it's pretty obvious. So we will be right back after this. Again, if you'd like to call in, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. or Skype in. Nonpartisan Liberty for All is the username, all one word. And you can get all that information at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and more. That's nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And we will be back after this.
Pill Drill is a nifty device that assists you by tracking when you've taken or forgot to take your medication. It works by tracking one's gestures. Simply wave the pill bottle in front of the sensor and your pill will be marked as taken. While not exactly exciting, Pill Drill is extremely important. The CDC states that 1 in 5 prescriptions is never filled, and nearly 50% of those that do fill their prescriptions don't take their medication properly. The CDC also estimates that this causes 125,000 deaths a year. Hopefully, with Pill Drill, dubbed the Fitbit for pills, will remedy this.
You will never be allowed to visit any of these magical places. Feel excluded? Me too. From yearly frat parties with government leaders to massive Mormon archives the church keeps tightly hidden away, except for a small part that contains information they've mysteriously been collecting on everyone in the world, to a place that has the most mysterious of reasons to continue operating even today, yet getting close to it will cause you immediate death. These are the top 10 most secret places you will never be allowed to visit. Number 10, Room 39. It's believed to be a $5 billion government organization dedicated to criminal activities such as meth and heroin production, counterfeiting, fraud, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking. This secretive office is thought to be located in Pyongyang, I can't say their capital city's name, near the residence of Kim Jong-un, Supreme Leader of North Korea, as everyone knows. The extreme isolation of the country as a whole, combined with the iron-fisted security of Kim's family dynasty, ensures that no one really knows this covert bureau's true purpose. Number 9. Bohemian Grove. Every summer for about 150 years, this secretive California campground hosts a gathering of the most powerful men in the world, including Republican Presidents Richard Nixon and Herbert Hoover, who was among the first senior members known as the Old Guard. No women are allowed. The Bohemian pagan-themed entertainment has been compared to a college frat party and described as having, quote, an all-pervading sense of immaturity. The Elvis impersonators, the pseudo-pagan spooky rituals, the heavy drinking. So it actually sounds pretty fun, but just a little bit creepy. But get this, private meetings at this retreat were directly responsible for arranging the Manhattan Project. That's the project that led to the development of the atomic bomb. Number 8. Ise Grand Shrine. This ancient Shinto shrine is dedicated to Amaterasu, the goddess of the universe, and ancestor of the Japanese imperial family, whom are also responsible for providing the chief priestesses and priests that watch over the site. The inner shrine is said to contain a holy artifact, the sacred mirror of Amaterasu, an ancient symbol of the royal family representing wisdom and honesty. Over the centuries, it's been burned in fires, stolen, and even thrown into the ocean. But somehow it always recovered. It is, however, strictly off limits to the public, and only the imperial family have seen this actual mirror. So unless you're Japanese royalty watching my YouTube video, and if you are, please comment and let me know. There's basically no chance you're ever gonna get to see this thing. Number 7. The Mormon Church's secret vault. As if they didn't have enough secrets, blasted deep into the side of a granite mountain is a temperature and humidity controlled storage facility containing over 3 billion pages worth of data. For over 100 years, the Church of Latter-day Saints has been meticulously gathering and archiving genealogy records on most Americans. I'm not exactly sure why they do this, but they freely share the information online and give tours of the front of the vault, but the secret chambers deep within the mountain are strictly off limits. The church has a ritual to baptize people as Mormons without their permission, even after they're dead and even buried. And it seems that this is their zealous motive for keeping such detailed records on everyone. Comment if you also feel like this kind of reminds you of the NSA. Number 6. The Vatican Secret Archives. The Vatican Library contains one of the most significant collections of historical writings in the world. But 400 years ago, a secret archive was locked away. It is said to contain 52 miles of shelving. A limited reading list has been disclosed, which really makes you wonder what they really have back there. And qualified scholars may apply for an entry card to the index room, where they may study specific texts retrieved for them by a librarian, but no one else is allowed to access the actual vault, including the Japanese royal family. Number 5. White's Gentlemen's Club. This is the oldest and most exclusive gentlemen's club in England, whose members include royals, aristocrats, politicians, and businessmen, many whose fathers and grandfathers were members before them. The bar never closes, and the club's betting book contains records of ridiculous wagers going back hundreds of years, like 2 lords racing raindrops on a window pane. No women are allowed, but Queen Elizabeth II broke this 300-year-old rule by visiting the club in 1991. She was the only woman to ever do so, and never went back. The rest of us aren't allowed in the door of this snobby club either, but it doesn't really sound that interesting anyways. Okay, maybe it sounds a little bit interesting. Number 4. Moscow Metro Number 2. A secret underground railway system runs deep beneath Moscow, connecting the Kremlin, former KGB offices, and presidential residences to deep underground command posts, a government airport, and also an underground city capable of sheltering 15,000 people from nuclear attack for up to, get this, 30 years. Built during the Cold War era, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had good reason to be paranoid that he might get nuked at any moment, and so he had this network of tunnels designed deep enough to survive the worst attacks. But officially it doesn't exist, so just forget everything I just said. Number 3. The Bilderberg Group. This annual meeting of the elite intellectuals more often than not includes heads of banks, business, and state rather than scholars. For 60 years, the private meetings have focused on policies in the United States and European Union. A meeting agenda is posted on their website, but no one really knows the closed-door deals that are really being made, since all attendees are sworn to secrecy. They've been accused of being the kingmakers of the Republican Party, Nazi warmongers, and evil dictators, intent on a new world order run by the banking system, which sounds kind of scary, probably because using money as a means of control sounds pretty feasible, but getting in to find out is not easy. Number 2. Disneyland's Club 33. If you thought the line at Small World was long, try getting a table at this magical 5-star restaurant where tableside animatronic birds know your name and the bathrooms have real thrones. Discreetly located at 33 Royal Street, above the Blue Bayou in New Orleans Square, a hidden panel conceals a buzzer, but you'd better have a reservation. The waiting list is about 14 years long, and the membership fee is $40,000 plus annual dues. Originally, it was conceived by Walt Disney as a perk to attract investors, but it rapidly became one of America's most exclusive clubs, and the only place in Disneyland that serves alcohol. And finally, number 1, Area 51. After all these years, it is still the most mysterious of secret places. Originally established by the CIA for the development of experimental aircraft, the area is permanently off limits both to civilian and normal military air traffic. Who knows what technology is stored and studied deep in the mountain beneath this top secret U.S. Air Force base? Perhaps it's extraterrestrial in nature, as many believe. Or perhaps it's man-made and far beyond even what we could imagine. Take into consideration that in around 1960, which is about 55 years ago, they successfully developed stealth aircraft technology here, and that's not a small achievement. Yet, even during modern times of relative peace, the base is still being used for something. Whatever it is, they really don't want anyone to know though, as the area is surrounded by cameras with infrared and motion sensing capabilities that allow snipers, which also surround the base 24/7, to kill you for even being in range of the perimeter of the base. A friend of mine was actually driving near the area when her and her friend's cell phones both immediately and simultaneously turned off for no reason, only to mysteriously turn back on again sometime later, as if they were being controlled remotely. Officially, they refused to acknowledge that the base even existed for almost 60 years, but unofficially, workers have reported testing alien spacecraft and viruses, with the help of a telepathic alien named J-Rock. Stop what you're doing right now. I need to tell you something. Watch our top 10 Mysteries of the Internet video. You will never be allowed to visit any of these
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com is our website where you can check that out. One of the stories that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, well, not that long, maybe a week, and it happens to fit perfectly into what we're talking about today is, well, actually, there's a couple of them, but one of the ones I was just going to talk about that I just lost was the replacing cash and going cashless. But so I want to talk about that article as well as the pill article. It sounded like the clip wasn't the pills that they ingest that have technology or some kind of technology within the pill, that it was the technology before that, but I'm not sure. That was a really quick clip, but we will talk about the article about the pills as well. But before we get to that, there is one article that is not related to our topic tonight that I did want to talk about for a couple weeks now. And that's, I hate how they name it this, but boots on the ground. There's boots on the ground. What if they're wearing shoes? I don't know. I usually wear boots. Actually, if I'm not at work, I'm usually wearing boots. And sometimes I'm even wearing boots at work a couple days a week. So, but this was from a couple weeks ago, and I just never got to it, or maybe a week ago. But it's funny because I wish I had the clip. So after claiming, I don't know how many times, no boots on the ground, and it's funny, on RT, the headline, and this is from April 25th, so it's not that long ago. The headline was, "No boots on the ground in Syria, but U.S. troops wearing boots and on ground there." So after, I do actually have a clip here that I could play. After saying for I don't know how long that there will be no boots on the ground, I'm not going to put troops in Syria, what did they do? They put troops in Syria because ultimately they still want Assad. Now, whether the troops, and I know some of them are special forces, have a mission other than ISIS, which I'm sure they do, and that's probably to get Assad. The whole reason behind this thing, and what's fucked up is people are still saying that Assad gassed his own people. So as far as, and for those who don't know, Assad is I think they refer to him as the president of Syria is his title, but he's the head of state in Syria. And it's got to be 2 years ago now, there was sarin gas or mustard gas. I'm not an expert on gases, except maybe human gas. Not that I'm an expert on that neither. My own gas, but there were a number of innocent civilians in a town in Syria, or a village or whatever, that were gassed by this sarin gas. And of course they showed the pictures, government media got involved, and promoted the fuck out of it or propagandized the fuck out of it, because that's what they do. So they had said Assad did it. That's back when Obama said a year before that, I'm drawing a line in the sand, and my red line, if it gets his own people, then we're going to attack. That's when he almost sounds like fucking Yogi Bear, at least my impression. I've said that before. Hey, boo-boo, get some picnic baskets, bring them to the White House. So they, and they still bring this up about his red line, even though it's just, it reminds me of 1984. Those that aren't familiar, 1984 was a book written by George Orwell where essentially the government controlled everything, and the main character even was, what was he, the minister of, I forget his exact name, but what he did was he changed misinformation or information, but basically it was he changed history. He'd write whatever they want the story to be, and that's kind of what they do now. So you still have people bringing this up, but they fail to mention that even though he said that, his red line was not crossed. So it got down to the point where, and they had said, oh, we're just going to do something little. Secretary of State, Kerry was already the Secretary of State at that point, had said, yeah, we're just going to shoot a missile or do something small, and come to find out that later when they investigated it, first they were going to do all this before they even investigated who did it. They were going to do it that weekend, and I believe it happened during the week because I remember following this very closely. And during that weekend, they almost did it, but what happened was, this is one example, and there's not many. I think the bill on guns is another example where people actually stopped it from happening. And there's not a lot of things that I think the public has the ability to stop from happening. But, and they only really stopped it because it made Obama think, not that he couldn't have gotten away with it or done it anyway, but he was like, ah, shit, I'm going to fucking look bad. So it was more about that and his legacy and him just looking bad. So people just went nuts and called their Congress people and were like, what the fuck? There's going to be another war. And we don't even know where the gas came from, if it came from the so-called rebels. I wouldn't call them rebels. To me, rebel is a term of respect, and rebels are people that are respected. They're fighting against some sort of tyranny. Otherwise, they're just terrorists or criminals or whatever you want to call them. But he was so close to doing it, and I really believe because all the calls that Congress was getting, and Obama was going to do it without getting permission from Congress, that he was like, fuck. I mean, nothing would have happened, but he would have looked bad. And I think he didn't want to mess with his legacy as well as have that as another criticism against him. So what they ended up doing was finally bringing in investigators from the UN, which of course took a while, to try to figure out where it came from. And it turns out that it came from the rebels, well, the people they were calling the rebels or the terrorists. And it did not come from Assad. And they were going to attack him over that. And we've talked about this before on the show, that, but also the fact of why they want Assad out of there. Because if you followed anything with Syria and Obama, it's always been about getting Assad out. They keep talking about getting him out. Now, I don't have enough of a background on Assad to say how bad he is. I know that he's not he's more secular than basically anybody I can think of that's left in the Middle East. He's not a ruler who rules by Muslim law. When you see him, I mean, he dresses in a suit. He speaks very good English. I believe he went to school in it might have even been in England. I mean, he was sent away to, like the best schools somewhere in Europe. And I think at some point he was educated in England. So he's a very educated man. And I'm not praising him or anything, because I know that a lot of people have died under his leadership. But at the same time, when you look at these leaders in the Middle East, if you compare him to all of these other guys who are devout Muslims following Islam in a way that is violent, not that I'm saying that all Muslims are violent and that Islam is violent, but I'm saying the leaders in the Middle East that are devout Muslims are pushing those laws, and a lot of them are very strict, like Saudi Arabia, where they're killing people over adultery and stoning women and things like that. So in Syria, from what I know, that's not how it is. It's not run by Sharia law. It's more westernized than other countries in the Middle East, and it's because of Assad. Whereas, the same thing was the case in Egypt, and then they got rid of Mubarak, who, from what I heard, was a bad guy and had tortured people and done a lot of bad things, and the U.S. supported him. But once they threw him out, you get a terrorist organization to be in charge, and I guess the military ousted him. I don't recall his name, but he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the point being that what they've done in the Middle East is take people that were more secular, that didn't push Muslim law or Sharia law on people, even like Saddam Hussein, who was a bad guy, hurt a lot of people, murdered a lot of people, although I believe he was connected with the CIA even going back to before he was in power. And I'm sure that is the case, but that's what I've heard. I can't confirm that from a declassified document or anything, but from what I've heard, he worked for the CIA or was a CIA operative even before that. But again, that's just speculation. So essentially taking him out would do the same thing that it did in Egypt, that it did in Libya, which people brush over this so fast, how the U.S. was involved in Libya and got Gaddafi out of there. Now, Gaddafi, again, he supposedly, I don't know if this was ever proven, but I remember when it happened, the bombing of, I believe, an English flight where he bombed a plane. And then in, I think it was 1982, Reagan literally bombed his compound and killed his daughter. And after that, it was like, didn't really hear much from him. But although he was in some ways socialist, because people would talk about that if you had a wedding, Ken Shorgen, who's our, I guess, resident expert historian who's on every other Wednesday, had said that when people got married, he would buy them a house. He would do all these things for them, that he was good to his people. Now, a lot of that was probably oil money, but in other countries like Saudi Arabia, you have the people on the top that keep all that money and don't give any to the people. Now, I don't know enough about how Libya was run government-wise. I know he was in charge, but how the economy ran. But you could say, well, the country had oil and they split that, gave some of that money back to the people, and that you could make a case that it belongs to the people to an extent. But he was doing things with, of course, one of the main reasons they talk about that they got rid of him was because there wasn't a central bank and he was doing things with currency. And I know he was trying to do a lot of positive things with Africa. I don't recall what he was trying to do, but I think it had to do with developing with the banks, but not centralizing the banks or having a central bank and staying away from that and having them stay away from that. So anyway, they took, again, somebody else who hadn't really done anything that bad in a long time. And I mean, when I say that bad, killing people, obviously innocent people, is horrible. So I mean, I'm kind of looking at this in perspective compared to the other leaders, but he was doing good things, at least at the time, from what I understand. So they say the people are the ones that took him out. Now, it wasn't the people. It was the U.S. It was the CIA. And, yeah, it might have been people that the CIA got together to, they might have been the actual ones that when they have the video of him being killed, and obviously it was from the air, I believe. So, I don't know if it was from U.S. troops. I assume it was. But they got rid of him because some of the same reasons. Oil, the not having a central bank. And he was also trying to open things up there. And at the same time, he wasn't somebody who pushed Muslim law or Sharia law or Muslim values on to the people. And what did they do? They got rid of him. So it's like they're getting rid of anybody who doesn't do that to destabilize the region. But when it comes to Assad, from what I understand, it has to do totally with oil and building a pipeline with Russia. So they know that they have to get rid of Assad. And that's a lot of the actions in the Middle East all have to do with oil. And it has to do with the fact that, as we've talked about a lot with Ken when he's been on, the fact that OPEC and the countries that are part of OPEC only sell oil in U.S. dollars, which, of course, helps the value of the dollar. It forces other countries to go through the SWIFT system, which converts their currency into U.S. dollars. Of course, there's a fee attached, which I'm sure goes directly to the U.S. government or the Fed. And obviously that inflates the currency because all of these countries have to hold U.S. dollars. That's the same with it being the reserve currency. So anything that is a threat to OPEC or the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency, they're going to do something about it. So it's like protecting their investment, essentially, is what they do. And I bet you 90-something% of the issues or things they've done in the Middle East, going back to, the last century, probably, what had to do with, well, actually OPEC, they only started doing that in the 70s when they took it off the gold standard. So you can't really say that anything before 1970 had to do with OPEC, but it may have had to do with the reserve currency and oil itself, because no matter what, even before the OPEC essentially backing the US dollar, the country obviously needed oil. So I would assume that the majority of incidences, whether they were wars or just bombings or whatever, had to do, or troops being sent in, had to do with oil. And then after 1970, when the U.S. was taken off the gold standard, and that's another thing that had to do with war, it was taken off the gold standard because they couldn't afford Vietnam. So because the U.S. couldn't afford Vietnam, they wanted to print a bunch of money and didn't have the gold to back it. Just fucked up. But that's why they want to get rid of Assad, from what I understand. So the whole involvement with Syria, because what has been going on in Syria has really just been a civil war for the past, I think, 3 or 4 years. I think more than that, because at the time that happened, it might have been going on 2 years already. So it might have been going on 4 years. And they have all this anti-Assad propaganda. But to me, one, they shouldn't get involved in any of this shit anyway. And now they're using ISIS who I believe they not only created, or not only control, but created. So they're using ISIS in Syria, and they're using that as the reason to bring troops in. So get ISIS to destabilize things and get ISIS to try to take out Assad as well. So that's not working, so now they're bringing troops in. But I wouldn't be surprised if they end up going after Assad and he gets killed in the process. Then they install a new leader who's, a fanatical fucking Muslim who pushes all of these violent and crazy Muslim laws on the people. So I don't have enough of a background of the history of Assad's rule to say, is he, from what I see, he's not as bad as somebody like Saddam Hussein, but he did oppress the people to a point. But I don't have enough information on that to really say to what extent. Now, with the rebels, I mean, most of them were or are, now they're ISIS, but Al-Qaeda linked, and, they call them moderates. I mean, so if you look at that, so you're looking at more fanatical Muslims, or they have a word for them that they call them, I can't think of it right now. We'll just call them fanatical, but they have a term that they call the radicalized Muslims. They call them, whatever. Well, I'll think of it at some point. But it's like they want them to be in control. It's crazy. So, and you look what happened in Iraq. I heard today there's 5,000 troops in Iraq now. It's constant war. And it's a war that they won going in the first place, which they shouldn't have done, because it kept balance in the region and at least it kept it somewhat stable. Then, of course, creating ISIS, which a lot of the members of ISIS are just doing it for the money. I had mentioned that before, that I forget what show it was on, but they were interviewing, they had reporters embedded with ISIS, and they were talking to some of the members in Afghanistan and asking why they were in ISIS, and they said, well, because the money. So, I mean, how many of these people are in it because of the money, and who's funding them? I know that I've heard, yes, of course, that they have all these things that are making all these money, supposedly. And I would say from that part of it is the U.S. government funding them, and then that could have been set up or with help from the CIA as far as how they're making money to pay all these people. But a lot of them, they don't give a fuck about the whole religious aspect or getting back at the U.S. or any of that. And that's not even, I mean, you look at what they're doing now, it's so fucked up, the propaganda that, they're going to come here and do this and do that. If that happens, it's because the U.S. government wanted them to and let them do it so they could take away more of your freedoms, which we're going to talk about a little later as far as where we're even at right now. And pretty much we're there. It's just people don't realize it yet. But they're sitting there fighting, in the Middle East, trying to take over Syria and Iraq and other places, and they're going to have time to worry about the U.S. And of course, again, I've talked about this before. It's a perfect setup for the United States government because they didn't have to send in their own troops to do the dirty work. They can have Muslims do it. And it looks like, hey, they're staying out of things and they're not getting involved, but they're still getting their goals met. And, which is to make sure, hold on to the oil, I think, in Iraq, and then, of course, get rid of Assad in Syria and ensure that OPEC is the main producer and seller of oil, as it's only sold in U.S. dollars. So, but the main point, and let me play this clip from the story, is they said, I don't know how many times, and again, I hate this phrase, no boots on the ground, but there are troops in Syria now. There were, last I heard, 250 special forces, but then they're adding more. And I did hear in a news report that there are 5,000 troops in Iraq. Now, I don't know if that's all U.S. military or partly contractors, or those were left over from the Iraq war, or what. But let me play this press conference real quick. And I think this is the one where they ask them, this is fucked up too. And again, 1984, they say that they never said that. One of the reporters says, you said no boots on the ground. Oh, we never said that. I think this is what that clip is. I'm hoping it is anyway. Oh, there's a stupid ad first that will end in 12 seconds. But the press conference was, we'll be putting troops on the ground, boots on the ground. And they say, well, you said you would never do that.
Confirmed plans to increase the American troop presence in Syria by deploying an additional 250 personnel,
and those are special forces.
The move is in contrast to the U.S. president's repeated promise not to put American boots on the ground in the war-torn country. However, his administration fails to see the contradiction.
Here it is.
And there was never this, there was never this no boots on the ground. I don't know where this keeps coming from.
I will not put American boots on the ground in Syria. We should not be drawn once more into a long and costly ground war. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil. The resolution we've submitted today does not call for the deployment of U.S. ground combat forces to Iraq or Syria. Putting boots on the ground, I think, would be a profound mistake.
Well, for more, let's bring in now Guy.
So they say, oh, we never, basically, no, we never said that. And then you have Obama and all the clips. We're not going to put boots on the ground. No boots on the ground. And really, I think it's that ISIS's goal is to take out Assad. They're not doing it. So they've sent in special forces. I guess now it's up to 300 because they said they're sending in 250. So there must be 50 there now, all special forces. And their goal is probably to take out Assad. I would think that would be the goal, because that's what they've been wanting to do for years. And if it wasn't for Russia, they probably just would have bombed them. That was another reason a couple years ago that they didn't do anything neither, because of Russia. So it wasn't 100% because of people, but I think that was a big part of it, because he was going to do it without Congress. But Russia also being an ally, I think, and coming out and questioning it as well as who's really responsible for that. Did they even have anything to do with it? So anyway, I think that's really what it is to take out Assad. But that was a story that I didn't get a chance to cover last week, and I've been wanting to talk about. So I want to get into all of these things that are going on and all of the what I call the infrastructure that they're building and have built and are using to essentially control every aspect of your life. And I think that's what governments are anyway. So just to, I guess, let the people know who haven't ever heard the show or haven't heard me talk about this, is I believe that the ultimate goal of the government, the U.S. government, and really I think every government, that's their goal. Their goal, because governments are about power and control. That's the whole point of them. And I've mentioned this so many times. If you look up the definition of government in the dictionary, and I've read it on the air before, and it mentions control in every definition. They claim, of course, it's to protect your rights and to protect the people, which in protecting the people, if that's what they're doing, if that's what they call protection, then they're nuts. But in protecting the people, they're violating all their rights. The point, and they're taking control and taking power. So the point of government, in my opinion, is to get to a point, because you can't start off this way. Well, you can, but it's a lot harder. You have to ease into it. Even Hitler took control pretty fast, but still had to ease into it, as opposed to just, taking control over everything without getting the support of the people initially. But in my opinion, the goal of governments is to get to a point where they control every aspect of your life, because the governments are there to continue to exist, to have continuity of government, to make sure that they expand like a business and get involved in everything, and that they're all big and powerful. And the other thing, of course, is about money when it comes to people within the government. But it gets to be more than just money. It's, if you remember Scarface, first you get the money, then you get the power. And I think he said then you get the women, but So I guess I never really thought of that the politicians getting the women as well. But it's kind of hard for them to do that. They got to be a little careful about that. So when it comes down to it, that's why, in my opinion, all governments exist. So for the U.S., it's taken a long time to go from the Constitution, which I still have a lot of issues with because it doesn't give you freedom or guarantee freedom. A piece of paper is not going to guarantee freedom, first of all, because it doesn't do anything. Once you give people power over you, they're going to look for more and more power and get as much power as possible and as much control as possible. And a piece of paper is not going to stop them, especially when, I mean, if you look at the government, what is the government run by? Well, the barrel of a gun is what keeps people, quote unquote, in line. Men and their weapons is what keeps people obeying. So for the United States, they were really good at creating an illusion of freedom, and I've talked about that before, and then taking that illusion of freedom and making people comfortable. So unlike other countries where they just kind of took over, within the United States, people are comfortable enough where they're not willing to risk anything. They're like, hey, you know, I got this and I got my nice house and my kids and my job, and I'm not going to risk that just because there's being, you know, people are being oppressed and killed. And, you know, as long as it doesn't affect me, which they don't realize, one, it's already affecting them, and two, if they don't see that part of it that's affecting them, it will be affecting them at some point if they don't totally fall in line and become, well, I don't want to say become a slave, because basically that's what you are. When you have money just taken out in taxes, you're essentially working for the government. I mean, it's extortion is what it is, you know, especially things like property tax, which is, you know, even worse than income tax, because you don't own your property. The government owns it. You rent it from them. So that's just to give a little background, I guess, on my opinion regarding the government. And you can see by all these things that they're doing how they're taking more and more freedoms and taking more control and more power and getting more involved in your life and taking more control over your life as well. So, I mean, they've already done this in a lot of ways, and a lot of it is just setting up the infrastructure of the gathering of all the data and the setting up of all the NSA storage, and like how they set up the one in Utah, the NSA data center in Utah, which is operational and has been for a while now. So, you know, in giving the police the tanks and the automatic weapons for what? And obviously all of that is directed at the people, because if you don't follow their plan or their rules, then they need something to enforce that if people try to rebel. So that's what they're gearing up for, obviously. And it's pretty crazy, and people don't want to face it or really look at the facts. So anyway, I had came across this article today regarding these pills. So, and it says it's from CNBC. Now, it says first they were wearables, now they're swallables. And suddenly a computer on your wrist doesn't seem so amazing. So I guess before, because I know they had some way of tracking, but it was some kind of thing on their wrist. And I understand the need for it because I have certain pills that I have to take every day. And I've forgotten if I've taken them or not. Like, I'll take it and then be like, did I take it? So now I don't think it's necessary for me to have some kind of thing that says whether I've taken it or not, or I need something, a sensor in my pills. But you're talking about older people who are taking medication. Like, if I don't take it, I'm not going to die, you know. But you have people that are taking pills that they may die if they don't take their pills. You're talking more about senior citizens who are also forgetful as well as they get older. As your mind, I guess, starts to go. Not that I want nothing against senior citizens. I'm just saying that, you know, as you get older, just like everything else, your mind starts to go. So it says that they have a small food particle sized piece of silicone, an integrated circuit. And on one side of that circuit is a film of copper. On the other side, a very thin film of magnesium. When you swallow it, these minerals get wet, and two dissimilar metals and aqueous contact define a battery, so you become a battery. That's nice. From there, the powered pill sensor sends a signal to a patch worn on the body, which sends data via Bluetooth to a phone or tablet or on the cloud for a doctor or caregiver. So it seems like a lot to go through. But essentially, you can look at it from two ways. Of course, yes, that's a good thing for older people. Make sure they take their pills, especially if they're taking pills that they could literally die or end up in the hospital if they don't take them. And if they're in the position where they have, a caregiver or something like that. What I think it will be used, of course, what I go to right away is the way they're trying, because we did a show on this about Prince and opiates, and to make sure that, people don't take too many of those, or to track things like that. Now, obviously, there's a positive side to the technology. Like I said, it would be good for older people, and they'd make sure they didn't take their medicine twice, and they'd make sure that they took it, period, because it would tell them. But really, what does that do? Except if it goes to a caregiver and you have a caregiver there, why not just have the caregiver give them the fucking medicine and then check it off? I mean, really? I almost don't see the point if you have somebody there. If you don't have somebody there and it's for that person, and then they have, on their phone, they can check and make sure they took all their medication. So I understand with that. But if it's going to a doctor or somebody else, like, what's the point? I guess the doctor could call them and say, I don't see that you took your medication today because I didn't get a thing. But it would be the same thing. It's like when you take your medication, press this button, then it goes to the doctor and tells them. So does that really do much? I also look at the other side to this as far as the technology regarding what they can do with it and being able to track you, where they can give you a pill that has a tracking device on it and they can track where you go like a human fucking GPS. And we've all been thinking about this and seen it in movies, and it's all something that we're aware of. And we almost don't need one because we all carry around phones. And in the phones, of course, even if you don't have your GPS on, which I won't use GPS, I won't turn on location tracking or any of that, but it doesn't really matter. We all know that the NSA can monitor your phones, your computers. They can turn your fucking cameras on. They can do all of this stuff. So it's almost like they're aware that we think about these things. And unfortunately, not enough people think about them. But they're aware that there are a lot of people like me that think about things like this, and there's enough movies out there, and it's funny how there's been a lot of movies that have come out and then things have happened, and there's a connection between Hollywood and the government and even the CIA. I remember the show I did on the connection with media and the government and how they had, what was it? It might have been the FBI, but they might have not even had technically the FBI yet back then, but they had somebody assigned to the movie industry. It was either the CIA or the FBI, or it was the version of the CIA back then, because I don't think the CIA, the CIA as we know it now, didn't come into existence until after World War II. So, but they had like the SS or there might have been another initial in there, but they've been involved in media since the beginning, and I even talked about declassified documents, about putting interns at TV stations. Like, they weren't interns, they were CIA agents, but they were interns at the TV stations that were actually, work for the FBI or work for the CIA. So that's the other thing too, is people don't realize that this has been going on, all of these things, for so long. So they've been, like I've always said, it's like taking one step at a time. You can't go from the bottom of the steps to the top steps. So based on the original government and the Constitution, they had to slowly take away more and more rights based on the amount of rights that were even in the Constitution in the first place, which again weren't enough, or it would have took longer. But a piece of paper is not going to stop anybody. And the only way that you'd have real checks and balances, and I can't say this enough, is how they tell you that you have the three branches of government and you have your checks and balances. This branch checks on this branch, or separation of powers, whatever you want to call it, either or. You don't have none of them because they're all government and they're all on the same team. So as far as checks and balances and separation of powers, that does not exist. Maybe when the government first came into first started, it worked a little better as far as separation of powers and checks and balances, but still, you never had it even back then. And really the only way you'd have a real checks and balances and separation of powers, and I've said this, is if the people had enough weapons and tanks and all the stuff that the government has, that if they had to challenge the government, they could. So there's a separation of power. Hey, look, if you're violating our rights, if you don't stop, we're going to fucking go to war with you. That's the only separation of powers. And I know that all these people are about peace. And I think, and not that I'm not about peace, because I am. I don't believe in a violent revolution or anything like that. I believe in getting people's hearts and minds. But I also believe in self-defense. And I believe in the reality that when things are enforced by the barrel of a gun, using only peace is pretty hard to, change things. So not necessarily change things, but at least have some kind of defense against it. Because I see it like this. I see it as a deterrent. I don't see it as anything happening. And that's what I see self-defense as well. So in a lot of cases. So what I mean is that if the people had what the government had, I don't think anything would ever happen. Just like countries that have nuclear weapons, they don't go to war with them because they know what's going to happen. So it would be more, yes, if the government violated the rights of the people, they either wouldn't do it in the first place, or if they did, they would do something to rectify that. Now, I think what would ultimately happen is that the government would do things secretly, of course, and develop more firepower and weapons where they would try to disarm everybody and take over that way. So that's why I believe government does not work, because no matter what, when you give somebody power over you, they're just going to take more power. And that's what they would ultimately end up doing, in my opinion. But what I'm really saying is, as far as the separation of powers thing, that it's more of a deterrent than anything. It's just like having a gun and having everybody armed. It's the same thing. If everybody has a gun, it's a deterrent for a lot of things. Criminals are not going to rob houses where they know that people have guns. And it's the same type of thing. So when I talk about that, I'm not talking about, these people that talk about some kind of violent revolution or something like that. Basically, you just lead to the exact same thing that you have now is all that would happen. It's not the goal, and it's not the goal's not the word I'm looking for, but if you're looking for freedom, it is not the way to freedom. It is not the path. Really, it's hearts and minds and getting people to realize what's going on. The whole problem is, if people realize what was going on, they can't challenge the government. You can to an extent, and I believe that if you get enough people, that it would be a peaceful, and I believe in a peaceful dissolving of the government. But within that, at the same time, I also believe in the self-defense part, and that there would be, I guess, incidences where you would have to defend yourself within that. But ultimately, it would be about peace. I always bring up what happened at the Bundy Ranch as an example of everybody was armed and nothing happened and nobody got hurt. And of course, that would be the best case scenario. But if you really want to have checks and balances and separation of powers, that's the only way. Or you want to give power to the people. This whole thing that, well, the people actually are the ones who have the power. The people are the government. No, they're not. And they never were. And they were never intended to be. Because they have no power. Because the government rules by the barrel of a gun. And if that's how they rule, how can you challenge that? You'd have to challenge it the same way. You can't challenge that with just protest or civil disobedience. I mean, it would in certain instances, but in the big scheme of things, no. Especially as bad as fucked up as things have gotten. So regarding the pill thing, I mean, that's just, government's just waiting to use technology like that if they're not using it already for whatever they want to use it for. And I guarantee you at some point, now how far away are we from this? I don't think far off, maybe 10 years, maybe less, that people have some kind of tracking device on them. The area that they live in, the police know where everybody is, no matter whether you're a criminal or not. And these are the type of things that are coming in the future, and that they're developing the infrastructure to do it. Because what they're going to say is, oh, you're not going to do this? Well, one, I guess they can just fucking force you, try to hold you down or something like that. But they got tanks and they got automatic weapons and they got all these things. So they're going to force you to do all this stuff anyway. Or they're going to say, we'll just shoot you. Hey, if you don't do what we want, we'll just shoot you. The other article that I had that I've been wanting to cover, and it actually it fits in, which is good, is replacing cash. Now, they've been talking about getting rid of $100 bills, of course, because they want to be able to track everything. That's another way to control every aspect of your life, is they can track everything you do. So they'll be able to track every transaction you make, everything you buy. I mean, right now, they're pretty close to it, but if you use cash, although they can see that you took money out of the bank because everything is going through a bank, well, not necessarily, I guess, if you're getting paid in cash, then it's not. But for anybody else, the majority of people, they're getting probably direct deposit, or they're getting a check deposit into their bank. Now, I know there are people that if you don't have a bank account and you're getting a check from a certain bank, so like say you get paid in a check from like Wells Fargo or something. But what they're doing now too is a lot of the banks are taking your fucking fingerprints as well. So you're getting a check from that bank, but they're taking your fingerprints, which is pretty fucked up. I know in Texas they do that on your license already. And the reason they give, of course, is that what everything comes back to when it comes to cash transactions is, or any transactions, is, oh, you could be a terrorist, and we have to make sure that, this is not terrorist money. But this is an article from the IB Times? The Times in the UK, but that phone payments could replace cash. So, of course, that wouldn't work for people that don't have phones, but, they could even get rid of credit and debit cards, and everything would just be, through your phone. So, of course, if you don't have a phone, then that's going to be an issue. And I've brought this up too about, Las Vegas is all a cash-based, casinos are a cash-based business. It's all cash. And you can't have people that are taking out, betting 10 grand or getting 10 grand in chips, getting all that fucking money in 20s. I know even, betting like, or getting $1,000 worth of chips or whatever that, I want to get hundreds. Or if you're putting $1,000 in a machine, you don't want to put fucking 20s in there. You're putting $300 in a machine, you don't want to put 20s in there. You want hundreds. So now, of course, they could go to a debit card, or, I mean, there's obviously a reason why they, it's all cash based. So, I mean, that's going to be an issue. And it's not just Las Vegas, of course. You have casinos. A lot of Indian reservations have casinos. You have riverboat casinos. You have Atlantic City. But once you get rid of cash, cash is privacy. Cash is the ability to conduct a transaction without it being recorded. And obviously the government doesn't want that because, again, you could be a drug dealer, you could be a terrorist, you could be this, you could be that. And that's the whole thing that they're going to. So this article is about going to phone transactions. So there's different types of ideas out there. I mean, of course, they could go just to debit cards too. They could go to any type of, card or RFID technology within a card or what, I don't know. There's so much different shit out there. I don't know why you need RFID to, I'm thinking like you could make a transaction and you wouldn't even have to swipe it. But, yeah, I mean, there's so much different technology out there, and there's constantly new technology being developed all the time. So if the goal is to replace cash, it's not hard to do it. It's just a matter of, is that something that the people are going to accept? And are they going to go with the whole bullshit of, and I guess it's not really even up to people, because it becomes down to it, businesses can say, well, we don't want to accept. I don't know what business doesn't want to accept cash though, because what happens is they get fees for credit cards. They get charges. So for each credit card transaction, they get a charge. So I don't know who wouldn't want to go to, who wouldn't want to accept cash. I think any business would want to accept cash and not go to some other technology. But if the government mandates that, well, every business, cannot accept cash, maybe you go to an underground market, but obviously the government can just eliminate cash on their own by seizing it all and then telling everybody to turn in their cash for credits on their cards or their whatever they go to, phones or whatnot. But the whole reason really to go to get rid of cash and to get rid of hundreds is to get rid of hundreds is to go more towards a cashless society. And then to obviously use phones or cards is to implement that cashless society. And again, in a cashless society, every transaction is tracked, and it's going to be all in a big database with the rest of your data. Now, there are things like Bitcoin, and I'm sure people are looking at developing other things. But to me, it's still gold is the way to go. And I think that's when people create their own underground economies, their own black market or agorist economies develop, hopefully. And people rebel against things like, cashless society. And that's where I'm saying, we'll talk about this a little later, with non-compliance, that it has to start happening, because that's the only way to stop a lot of this stuff, is to essentially, it's like opting out, although it's illegal depending on what it may be. But at some point, people have to draw a line and say, well, you're already violating the Constitution, who knows how many times that it's been violated, even though, again, it doesn't give you the amount of freedom that there should be, which it should be as long as you don't hurt anybody else or their property, and then you do whatever you want. And you don't need a fucking government for that, as far as I'm concerned. But at some point, people have to draw a line and say, I can't comply with this, and I'm not going to comply with this, because they have a lot of plans that have already been talked about. And I'm talking about not secrets, but, you read articles all the time as far as things that the government wants to implement, or that they're thinking of implementing different types of technology, like what I just talked about with the phone and getting, moving to a cashless society, which they've been talking about for years now. Things like implementing, taxing you on your mileage. That's another thing, tax, and getting taxed on every little thing and being able to track every little thing. That's another excuse to track things, but like they want to put a GPS that tracks your mileage in your car, and then, who knows how often, but probably once a year when you register your car, or maybe once a month, you pay for the amount of miles you drove. And they've been testing that now for, the first article I read on that was a couple years ago, and it was in the LA Times, and they were already testing it at that time, and then went to pilot towns. So I don't know where that is at right now, where they're at in the process, but that's another thing that they're trying to implement. And that's something where I would draw the line at. No, I'm not going to put a fucking thing in my car with GPS that tracks my mileage so I can pay taxes on my mileage. So that's what I'm saying. Where do you draw your line there and say, fuck this? I'm not going to sit there and comply with this bullshit. And it may be too late. I mean, we may all be fucked, and we're going to end up not essentially, but total slaves of the government, where they have the power really to get you to do whatever they want. I mean, they're pretty close to that now, but I think there's still some level of freedom. Not much, but pretty soon I don't think there's going to be any. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about all of these things that the government is doing to track you and take more control over your personal life. If you'd like to call in, you can call in at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you can Skype in at username nonpartisan liberty for all. So, and check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com.
Well, tell me what kind of information you started being able to get and how long you were doing this.
I started sort of dabbling with this maybe a couple of years ago. There's people have written software. There are free programs you can get, run it on your computer, and you get kind of a virtual radar screen. Mm-hmm. So you see nearby airplanes. This can probably pick up usually within about 100 miles, occasionally further than that. So you see all the aircraft within that range, where they are, how fast they're going, what kind of aircraft they are. There's a unique identifier that they all broadcast, and you can cross-reference that with FAA data, so you know who owns it, what kind of plane it is. People even compile like regular airline flights, so I can say this is going from LAX to Vegas, or whatever the flight plan says.
What kind of aircraft could you not pick up with that information?
Let's see. There's different aircraft send different amounts of data. Every aircraft pretty much is sending at least its altitude.
This sheet, this is one of your files that you created. Tell us what we're looking at.
So this is a list of maybe 30 aircraft that are being picked up.
Yeah.
And you can see on the left side there's this hex unique ID for the aircraft. You can see what they're squawking. So there's on the transponder, you can squawk a code.
Yes.
Usually air traffic control just says, they instruct you what to squawk. It helps them keep track of you on their screens. Mm-hmm. But there are some other things, other subtleties about the squawk codes that come up later. You can see, flight numbers. Sometimes it's a registration number.
Yep.
Like the one on the top of the list, you can see the flight number is N662PD. A lot of the police department aircraft, so that's a LAPD helicopter. A lot of the
at 1,000 feet.
Right, altitude 1,000 feet. That one doesn't have speed, heading, or position. But some of the others, you can see how fast they're going, which direction they're traveling, and their GPS coordinates.
At that point in time?
Yeah, at that instant.
Okay. So you're getting a lot of information here.
Yeah.
So you start collating that. Now, I guess you threw it into a spreadsheet or something. How did you, when you start getting all this information into your computer, how did you start kind of correlating it into something that you knew what to do with?
Yeah, that was kind of the key to really seeing any patterns, was creating a historical archive.
Yes.
Because I would look at this occasionally and I'd say, well, I feel like I see N662 PD all the time, or other specific planes, but I didn't have like the historic record to examine. Mm-hmm. So I started putting it all into a database, just like a free database running on Linux, Postgres. And once I did that, I did it for a few months. And even at that point, even after just a few days, I was able to say, wow, I see this plane every other day, or I see this plane, once a week.
Yeah.
So I was able to start seeing patterns more easily.
Now, this is a map that I saw in your paper. Now, this is 2 weeks of transponder pings.
Right.
Okay, this is the Los Angeles basin. Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, Santa Monica's over there, Monterey Park, Montebello, all this. Now, is that LAX at the bottom, I guess? Okay, so these green lines, what does this mean?
Those are different flight paths. I think, there's a couple green lines going east-west from LAX. I think those are, the landing approaches. And you can see takeoffs to the west, and they're not quite as straight because they kind of take off and turn right away.
And then every single green point
Every single green point is a transponder ping that contains position. I mean, there's a lot more than this. If you zoom in, I mean, you can zoom in infinitely far almost, and what making this map showed me is like it doesn't just seem like there's always a helicopter or a plane overhead. There really is, like every square foot of the city almost.
You said you had 5 million transponder pings in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are just the ones that have position. I mean, right now, maybe a third of aircraft are broadcasting their position. So there's a lot more aircraft up there than this map shows.
We begin this hour with new numbers illustrating the vastness of the surveillance state. We're now learning that out of the more than 1,400 surveillance requests made by the National Security Agency and the FBI filed in 2015, the United States Foreign Intelligence Surveillance, or FISA court, did not turn down a single one. This according to a Justice Department memo. The FISA court was created with the intention of sorting through requests by U.S. intelligence agencies for surveillance authority. The latest news raises serious questions over just how much scrutiny, really, the court is placing on those requests. RT correspondent Manuel Rapolo has the details.
Behind me here is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or FISA court. Now, if you've never heard of it before, that's because this court keeps a pretty low profile. A lot of its work is conducted in secret, behind closed doors, far beyond the reaches of any journalist or reporter. It is safe to say that this is a secretive court. Now, every year, U.S. intelligence agencies like the NSA, the FBI, they submit requests to the FISA court. These requests are for surveillance orders, things like telephone communications, emails, text messages, that sort of thing. It is the job of the FISA court to scrutinize every one of these requests to make sure that any surveillance order that is issued isn't issued without there being a warranted need for it. But according to a report by Reuters, citing a memo by the Justice Department, in all of 2015, not a single request made to the FISA court was rejected. That's right. Of the 1,457 requests made last year by the NSA and the FBI to conduct surveillance on individuals, not a single one of these requests was denied. This means that either the FBI and NSA have a perfect batting average when it comes to determining who they're going to conduct surveillance on, or something isn't quite right. According to Reuters, the DOJ memo has since been passed along to the relevant congressional committees. While the FISA court has a long history of being criticized as little more than a rubber stamp for any intelligence agency trying to conduct surveillance, this latest news is sure to add fuel to that debate. The FISA court also happens to be the court that issues national security letters. These are basically subpoenas that intelligence agencies use to compel private companies to turn over personal data on their customers, everything from billing information to browsing history. More often than not, national security letters come with a gag order, meaning that once a company is legally forced to give up the data on their customers, they then cannot legally tell anybody about it. Now, according to the report, the FBI made a total of 48,642 requests for national security letters to the FISA court. It's unclear, however, how many of those requests were approved. Manuel Rapolo, RT, Washington.
I'm Joe Biggs with Infowars.com. Today I got an email from a listener, and from time to time we get tips sent in, and from time to time we actually do stories on them because they're legit, they're really good. And the one that I got today is called, it's about the new forced Facebook policy that will be enforced on January 1st, and it's a really interesting policy. It's a little bit different from what we've seen in the past. You know, ever since the 9/11 attacks, the Patriot Act was put into place, and we've essentially just lost all of our privacy, you know, any kind of privacy we have on our phones. You know, I've done reports where I've shown you on my personal Android, Samsung right here, that it says that the NSA is spying and collecting data. The iPhone as well, they have that in their terms and services as well. And now the issue is, are they going to start saying that the CIA, the FBI, these guys are going to be considered third parties? Because what it does now is it says that third parties will have access to your information. Now, what it says is, we'll collect information from or about the computers, phones, or other devices where you install or access our services. So, say you have Facebook and you download the app on your phone. Now you've given them access to your phone, your contacts, your locations, where you're at, because you have that location button on. It'll let them know your exact location, where you're at. Any kind of pictures, whatever you think that you might have that's near and dear and private to you, once you click yes, accept to that Facebook terms and services and conditions, you're now giving them the ability to go through your phone. And on your computer, once you open that device up, or once you open that website up, I should say, and go to facebook.com, on January 1st, it's going to say, click yes or no, do you accept these new terms and services? I challenge you to read those and find out what they say, because it says, such as the operating system, hardware version, device settings, file and software names, types, battery, signal strength, and device identifiers. So it's going to, when you get on your computer, it's going to say what kind of operating system you're on, what hardware you have, the device settings, file, software names you have, your battery, your signal strength on your phone, device locations, including specific geographic locations through your GPS, your Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi, connection information such as the name of your mobile operator, or the ISP, the browser type, the language and time zone, mobile phone number, and IP address. This is what Facebook is doing now. This is no longer a place for friends. This is a place for the NSA, the government, to spy on every single thing you do.
What's the mindset of these mammoth corporations who are now apparently in partnership with government?
Eric Schmidt is Google's CEO.
People are treating Google like their most trusted friend. Should they be?
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Google has already been caught and fined for systematically hacking and harvesting passwords from millions of private Wi-Fi networks with its mapping cars, and illegally siphoning private data from iPhone users.
We don't need you to type at all, because we know where you are, with your permission. We know where you've been, with your permission. We can more or less guess what you're thinking about.
So Schmidt simply views the invasion of privacy as a way to allow the internet giant to gain more information about you. And then that data will let the search engine help you in your everyday life. Don't you get it? Google is trying to amass a huge amount of personal information about you to help you. Duh.
There's what I call the creepy line, and the Google policy about a lot of these things is to get right up to the creepy line but not cross it. I would argue that implanting things in your brain is beyond the creepy line.
Mine in particular.
Yes, at least for the moment, until the technology gets better. Let's talk a little bit about information and search.
Wait a minute, what was that?
I would argue that implanting things in your brain is beyond the creepy line.
Mine in particular.
At least for the moment, until the technology gets better.
Is he saying that Google's creepy line is defined only by the current level of technology? What does a higher level of technology have to do with morals or ethics?
But what I learned in Silicon Valley was there is no moral component to technology unless humans insist that it be there.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in. Username, Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and we are back. A couple things regarding the clips that I had played. Some of them were the Google one I had played before a while ago, and I don't think that that's news to a lot of people, that Google really just collects all your information. They try to even predict what you're trying to search for and what can be done with that. If people don't think about all the possibilities of knowing what people, even if you look at the majority of what people are searching for, even that alone, it gives you the ability to know what society at large is interested in or what they're thinking about, or companies or stock market, where it's going to go, or just all these different type things, not to mention that their relationship with the government and pretty much all of these social media and search engines and, well, Google, of course, is not just a search engine. They have all these other applications as well. So you really got to think of it as anything on your phone, anything on your computer, anything on any electronic device, what you watch on TV, any of that, even music you play on your computer or your phone, that they know what music you play. And if you wanted to study somebody, you could maybe predict when they're in a certain mood based on what they're listening to or what they're looking at, or there's so much more to it, because at the same time they have these algorithms that they program to predict behavior as well. And who knows what they're doing with all this information, but they have access to it all. At least the NSA does, and Google has a lot of that information. Facebook has a lot of that information. So you really got to look at it like anything on your computer, anything on your phone, anything on any electronic device that can connect to the internet. And maybe even ones that can't, who knows at this point, but that any information on those is collected by or being stored by the government and whatever company that application belongs to. So I'm sure on every person there is a big file in a database. It doesn't mean that they look at it, but it's there if they want to. And then, like I said, there's other things that they can do as far as, say, you look at something that in comparison to other things, it's not as bad, but if they want to put out propaganda based on people's search engine results and what they're looking at and those type of things, it might help a campaign with, okay, how do we get people to vote this way on this issue or adopt this view? It gives them a level of control. And then at the same time, you have government media sitting out there putting all this propaganda out there. So you have to really assume that all of that stuff is sitting in a government database and they have access to it. And the company that makes the application, maybe a few different companies. So in the case of your phone, say it's a Samsung phone, that Samsung, Google, the NSA, and maybe a few other government agencies have all that data. Really, if you want something to be private, you got to get a fucking notebook and a pen and write it down there and make sure that you're out of sight of any cameras, because the government can go in to your computer or your phone and take control of it. There's been a lot of stories on that. A school was actually doing that, where they gave high school kids, I believe, or it might have been younger, computers, and they were turning on the cameras and seeing what they were doing. So all of that stuff, you have to just assume that they have access to it all. So unless you have a room that is, I would think of like the foam that I have in the studio, pad a room with foam, soundproof a room, don't put anything else in there, no windows, no electronic devices, and get a notebook and a piece of paper and something, a fireproof barrel, and write notes to somebody back and forth and then light them on fire. And at some point, and this might already exist. They'll have the technology to see through walls, which they probably have anyway, but there may be ways to, I guess, not soundproof, but whatever you want to call it, proof your house so they can't see through it. But that would be, I think, if the government was singling you out to look at everything you do. I believe all this information, and I think it's pretty much been proven that it's being collected. It's just a matter of, is it being looked at? And no, obviously they can't look at everybody's information, but how much information goes through some sort of automated process where it gets checked for keywords or key sentences or key combinations of words. And if that gets flagged, then they look into things more, they go into more detail and look into more into things. So that's where things are going. And regarding the guy with the air traffic that he was following, one of the other things that I've noticed, and I don't know if other people have noticed this as well, as I see helicopters everywhere, and I see helicopters even in my own neighborhood flying around monitoring things. And they have on helicopters now, I mean, they can see with these cameras details of a person. It's not like, you know, they're seeing a helicopter view. They're obviously seeing like you would see if you were standing right there. And I think what they're doing is patrolling, to be honest, and just going around and seeing what's going on. And that's scary as well. But I mean, that's not half as scary as all the other stuff that is going on. So I want to go through some of the stuff that people may or may not be aware of. Of course, they mentioned the FISA court, that they sign off on everything. And of course they do. And you have those people that would get the warrant have access to that information anyway. So what does it fucking matter? Essentially, as I mentioned earlier, with no checks and balances, I mean, when it comes to warrants and it comes off to not just FISA courts, but any court, it seems to be getting to the point that they sign off on any warrant. It doesn't matter. If the police ask for a warrant, it's meaningless. That's supposed to be, as I mentioned earlier, a check and balance or separation of power, but it's not. If a cop wants a warrant, he'll get a warrant for the most part. Maybe occasionally you might have somebody that will not sign a warrant, but for the most part, it's all rubber stamps. That's what it is, and a warrant doesn't mean anything. So for a cop to sit there and say, well, I got a warrant, so to me, that doesn't really mean anything. Now, in a court of law, obviously, they'll say, well, we have permission because we got a warrant. But the whole court system is fucked up. There is no justice. There is no fairness. It's all about the government winning their cases and controlling you and getting you to do what they want them to do. And if you get into a court, you've already lost. Unless you're going to be able to get some financial settlement, and the amount of times that happens is not very often, unless you're dead, but then you're not getting the money anyway. So unless one of your relatives gets killed by the police or something like that, and where's the winning in that? You know, somebody's dead. So usually you won't get money for the cops violating your rights, or even, I had bruises on me and stuff like that, and they still got convicted of a ridiculous obstruction crime. There's no, and this is not just based on my own experience. It's based off of research and reading all these articles and everybody else's experiences that I know as well. And there is no, the way the court system works, they say it's funny when I hear people say how it's the best system in the world, and most of these people have never been in a court in their life, and they're saying that, and unless you've been through the system or have examples of cases that you've studied or looked at, and even then, I mean, you don't know the real facts. You just know what they say the facts are, which usually are not the facts. And they punish you if you take it to trial because they want you to plead out. You get a more serious punishment than if you just plead out. And that's what they want. And 90% of the cases, they plead out. Only 10% go to trial. It's a crazy fucking system, and there's no justice in it. We talked about the pill and how that can be, the technology of being able to have you swallow something or have something in your body that can be read or tracked or alert something, even if it's something like an RFID. I don't know how far the technology is right now, and they're not going to tell, usually stuff is like at least 10 years behind what the government has as far as what they'll actually come out and tell you, and maybe even more. So for all the things that we do know that they have, there's probably a bunch of even more that we don't know. Most people know about license plate readers. They have them on police cars. You can see them. They record every license plate so they can try to put together where everybody goes when they're there, all of those details to collect more information on you. The police used the FBI technology. They were told not to say anything, so they couldn't use it in court, but they could use it. They could use the information that they got out of it. So they have this Stingray cell phone towers, which is like it replicates a cell phone tower, and then they can listen to your calls, the police. Now, I'm sure the NSA can listen to your calls anyway, and that they're recording all that information, but the police didn't have it. But I guess they're using that technology, which they're not supposed to be using, and especially without a warrant, because they're using it without warrants. And that's why they didn't use it in court. But it doesn't matter, because if they get enough information off the call, they can use that to find something out where they can be somewhere to arrest you or something like that, meaning that they can use that information to put together a case, but not directly from it, meaning like they can't use that information to convict you or bring it up in court, but they can use it to know, okay, they're going to be here at this time to make a drug deal, and they could say, well, they just pulled somebody over randomly and whatever. For example, of course, the NSA, we all know about that. People don't seem to care. They still continue to not make a big deal of it, to not try to at least put some type of encryption on your computer or on your phone. For your phone, there's Signal. A lot of this stuff is created by these companies, so who knows if they don't have backdoors and how good they are. But I think something like Signal will help if they really want to get into your call or your text, they probably can break it easy. But I think for, the average data collection, that it will make it harder, and that it has a level of protection. And, of course, there's different encryption, and there's, VPNs to protect your IP address. There's the dark web, where you can essentially surf the web anonymously, but you have to be careful about that too. I mean, if you're not doing anything that is illegal anyway, but you just don't want them collecting your data, then, you don't really have to worry at all. I know there's certain precautions that you want to take. I've heard people talk about them, but I don't know the specifics. I know that Brian Sovereign of Sovereign Tech, I would find archives of his show. Probably just look up Sovereign Tech, Brian Sovereign. He talks a lot about stuff like that. Of course, social media, we've talked about moving to a cashless society. They are implementing the Real ID. I actually forgot to ask her, but my fiance just renewed her license, and it was something like 2 different types of licenses. That one is the Real ID. It complies with the Real ID Act, and one doesn't. I have to find out more information about that because I'm still not clear. There's RFID technology. I actually worked for a company that produced that, and they showed it was a sticker, and then you could see the, I don't even know what you would call it. It looks like a circuit board almost, like some tiny one, and they would put that. And back then, what they were using it for was scanning packages. So as things came in that were shipped to a company, it would just automatically pick it up and register it on a computer from 20 feet away or something like that. I don't know how far RFID technology has progressed. With the banks now, I wouldn't even put any of your savings in any bank accounts, because there's the option of them doing a bail-in and taking a percentage of your money. At the same time, there's been people with businesses that have been charged with structuring where I think if it's $10,000, it gets reported to the government. I mean, it's crazy. You deposit $10,000, you got to fill out some form, and it gets reported to the government. And people not putting $9,000 or $8,000, and they've taken money from people, not charged them with a crime, just taken their money. And usually the amount of money, I remember reading about a small business where it was $30,000 that they took, and they ended up getting it back, but you have to hire a lawyer, and who knows how much that's going to be. And a lot of times they know that people aren't going to bother to get it back because it's going to cost them more to get it back when it's a smaller amount of money. And it's all the what do they call it? Asset forfeiture. But they used to do it, and I don't think they have a right to do neither. But they'd actually arrest somebody for a crime, drug dealers, and take all their assets, and then they get to keep a percentage of them, and that's why they would do it. One of the reasons, because they'd get a percentage of it. And it was just a incentive for them to rob people, essentially. And now they have the civil asset forfeiture, which is more what I'm talking about. along with the structuring, and it allows them to basically seize your money pretty easily. There was, I had mentioned this on Glenn Beck. He was talking about how an expert he was talking to said, oh, if you took your money out of the bank and you had cash, say you had, $30,000 worth of cash, and they had found it, that you should keep your receipts from the bank, because they would take your money and say, well, how do we know that this isn't from selling drugs or something like that? And that's where, I talked, when I was talking about opiates and Prince, and I talked about one of the most, the worst things or most important things that needs to be done is the legalization of all drugs. Or not even the legalization, the decriminalization. The drugs are like anything else. Because the amount of other things that they could do because of it. And now they're using terrorism the same way they use drugs, but they're taking it to a whole nother level. First, they used drugs to do all these things and violate all these rights. Like, reasons to search you. They could say, well, we smell marijuana, or the dog hit on your car. So they were able to use drugs, and I would suggest reading Radley Balco's book, Rise of the Warrior Cop. It talks a lot about the drug war and all the damage that it did. And believe me, I mean, anybody who thinks Reagan is a great president either doesn't know or they're out of their fucking mind. And it goes into all this stuff. I mean, all the people that have been killed, innocent people that have been killed. I mean, and it's still going on. That's the whole thing. How long does this shit have to go on? Not only is it still going on, but they're trying to up it. Like, now they're trying to go after prescription drugs. So, and now heroin, because they're saying there's a heroin epidemic, which is they're blaming on prescription drugs. But really, if all of them were legal, the amount of problems you would have would drop significantly. But that's a whole nother show. But they're continuing to crack down. Now, people can just look at, oh, well, things are getting better because look at marijuana. Well, that's one thing. And trust me, the DEA, when they're looking at how they're losing marijuana, and that potentially they will totally lose marijuana at some point, although they'll still regulate it like the ATF, who shouldn't even exist, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, which are all legal. The fact that there's a ATF is ridiculous, in my opinion. But not only do you still have this going on, but they're even upping it. And you have some fucking moron, like the doctor that ran for president, Dr. Moron, that wanted to up the war on drugs. He wanted to go and get more DEA agents and put more money into it. It's crazy. And these are people that say they believe in freedom and liberty. There's something called self-ownership. And I had played a clip when I had done the show on Prince about how before 1914, when all drugs were legal and you could buy them at the store like anything else, they weren't a big deal, that before that, the government never told you what to put in your body. They never had a law against it. That's part of freedom. That's a huge part of freedom. Things like prostitution and drugs And you could say, well, it ruins families and it does this and it does that. Well, a lot of that is because of the fucking government and it being illegal. But the government thinks they own you. They think that they can tell you what you can do with your body, what you can put in your body, that your body belongs to them. And it doesn't. You are born with certain rights. And among those is what to put in your body, what to do with your body. It's your fucking body. I don't care if you want to cut your fucking hand off. Of course, in that case, I hope somebody would talk to you about it first because you probably have some kind of mental issue. But it's your body. You can sell, so you can physically sell yourself, right, to do things. You can physically work in a warehouse and box things or pick things up or sweep. Or I was just thinking sweeping because I was sweeping today. There's all these jobs that you can get paid for doing physical labor. But if some girl or, hey, even some guy wants to sell a certain body part, the government will come after you. And they talk about all of these sex slaves or these the human trafficking. If prostitution was legal, especially in the U.S., because that's really where they're all going, you wouldn't have any human trafficking. And if you did, it would be so low that you would save so many people. Because it being legal, it would make it so they'd probably be able to get out of it. Between that and immigration, those are the two reasons why human trafficking is what it is, because of immigration laws and because of prostitution being illegal. I guarantee you get rid of all immigration laws, because why should you need permission from the government to go somewhere? Now, at the same time, I think you should get rid of all public assistance and all that, because people coming into a country and then getting money from the government, but of course, if there was no government, it wouldn't matter anyway. But what they'll do is they'll create these laws and then twist things around, and they'll twist them around so they'll make people think that are ignorant enough to fall for this bullshit that, oh yeah, that's what it is. It's prostitution. That's the problem. Prostitution, the reason why you have a huge human trafficking, not the fact that it's illegal, like drugs. Or drugs are the problem. Now, I'm not going to say that if you make all these things legal, that everything would be perfect. There is no perfect utopia. There is no nothing like that all of a sudden there wouldn't be any deaths or nobody would have any problems with drugs. But you definitely cut it down, as well as cut down the amount of people that do it in the first place. There's so many things that, I would say all drugs, all prostitution, all of these things should be legal no matter what, because you own yourself and you have a right to do what you want with your own body. Even if the statistics showed that them being illegal saved lives and whatever. But the statistics show just the opposite. And they still have it being illegal. So not only do they violate your rights and then talk about freedom, but at the same time, all the data is telling you the opposite. It's so fucked up. You know why? Because it has nothing to do with what's best for people. It has nothing to do with caring about people. It's about power and control and controlling every aspect of your life. And the people in 1914 should have fucking done something about it back then, but they didn't do shit. Or maybe they did do some stuff, but obviously they didn't do enough. The other things that they're going after, the government, of course, is the internet. They want to be able to monitor the internet more. They want to crack down more on internet businesses because right now the internet is the only thing that is semi-free where you can have freedom with businesses and websites and a lot of this stuff to an extent. Because you have somebody like Ross Ulbricht who went to jail he got 30 years for having a website called the Silk Road, where he didn't even sell any of this stuff, but he built a website that allowed people to sell drugs and things like that off it, illegal stuff, fake IDs, whatever. And he wasn't even the one selling them. So the internet is somewhat free, but they don't want it to be that way. You look up internet ID and how many times Obama mentioned having an internet ID, meaning one ID for everything, so they can block you from the internet. They can track you on every site you go to, everywhere you go. And trust me, if they could figure out a fucking way to do it, they would. And I'm sure that they have a whole team dedicated to figuring out a way to fully track people on the internet. Right now, I mean, you have IP addresses, you have the internet connections that you use as ways of tracking people. So, I mean, there's ways around those, but they want to be able to stop people's ability to get around any of those. Then, of course, you have what's going on in schools, which has been going on since the beginning. People who don't know, and if you don't know by now and you've listened to the show before, then I don't know. But I've said it enough times, but the school system was built on the Prussian model. The king of Prussia basically came up with, I don't know why I always say basically or essentially, but the king of Prussia, and it was part of Germany, came up with, after they lost to Napoleon, they thought that the reason why was because the soldiers thought too much. He didn't want the soldiers thinking. So he created schools not only for the soldiers, so they wouldn't think, they'd be taught really not to think, and they dumb them down, but also so everybody would agree with the king. They wouldn't question anything he said. They would just agree with him. So Horace Mann, among other people, but he's the big name. I believe, I don't know if he went there or studied their model, how he studied their model, but he did, brought it to Massachusetts and implemented it there in 46 or 64, somewhere in the late 1800s. And then by like early 1900s, all the states had adopted the school system in the way it is and made it mandatory. And now they have Common Core, and all these people are trying to fight against Common Core like, oh yeah, if you get rid of Common Core, that solves the issue. It doesn't solve shit. Common Core is just the worst case scenario or what they've built up to. But it's been terrible since the beginning because it's been based on indoctrination and all of these things. So all of those things have been going on. Common Core also has the databases and what to track and what information to keep on all these kids. But, you know, and of course now they have police in the school. I think right this minute, actually, well, I guess everybody's out of school, but it's too late. But tomorrow morning, everybody should take their kid out of fucking school and start homeschooling them, or get together with their neighbors or people that live in their neighborhood or are like-minded and start their own little schools, little home schools, and take all your kids out of government schools. That's how you solve that problem. And that needs to be done as soon as possible. That's the other thing that I think, if there's going to be any freedom in the future, people need to take their kids out of government schools. Drugs need to go back to how they were before 1906, or at least 1914. 1906, the law there was that they had to label what drugs were in products. So I don't have a problem necessarily with that. But 1914 was when you needed a prescription, essentially, and you had to pay a tax on any drugs. And they started the first crackdown. Then the second crackdown was because Nixon was upset that in Vietnam, all the soldiers were getting all fucked up. And if you were drafted to Vietnam, didn't want to fight in a war, you'd probably be getting fucked up too. So then, of course, police militarization, which we've talked about so many times. The police got fucking tanks now. They have automatic weapons. They have all of these things. They have the same stuff that the military has. Why? We know why. Because they're preparing. All of this is all infrastructure. All of this is to build the infrastructure, ensure there's a future of this continuing and moving towards controlling every aspect of your life. So you got essentially, you put the kids in the schools, you indoctrinate them. You get them used to a militarized police, to police in the schools, to we need to know all this stuff about you. We need to control you because of terrorism. We need to protect you. So in order to protect you, we need a cashless society. We need to track all your transactions. We need to know what you're doing online. We need to know all of these things about you. We need access to your fucking social media profile. We need to put a chip in you. We need all of these things because of terrorists and drug dealers and all of this stuff to protect you. And they brainwash them. They implement all these things. They have nobody to really fight back because the majority of the population agrees with it. And that's pretty much how it is now anyway. You're just not fully there yet, but you're pretty close to it. And then anybody tries to fight back, they run them down with a fucking tank. And that's the reality. Now, one other story that I've been wanting to talk about for a couple weeks, that is a positive one. And then I'm just going to briefly get into some things that people can do, or that I believe. And then we'll end the show. I've been trying to end the show at 9, just so I get enough sleep. But as long as I end it by 9:30, and even the nights I ended it at 10, I was still okay. It was when I was doing the show till 10, and then after working on my website and trying to work on ideas for shows and putting stuff together, and then it got bad. I got like 3 hours of sleep, and I'm like at work because I get up at 5:45. Anyway, so between, let me bring up the article to find out, because I don't remember exactly the two. I think it's Slovenia and Croatia, but let me see. There's a small amount of land called Liberland. It's on the Croatian and is it the Slovenian border? Yeah, the Croatia-Serbia border. So in between the Croatian and Serbian border, I guess neither of them have claimed this land, there is what they're calling the Free Republic of Liberland. And this guy, Vit Jelica, I guess it's, looked at as a joke, but there's hundreds of people, I think even more, it's pretty small, but that want to move into this Liberland. And I guess they have a small government with 5 people. The Minister of the Interior, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the First Lady, and the Minister of Finance. And they would like to invite 5,000 people who support Liberland and have a big, I guess, festival there. This is a long article, so I was going to read the article to everybody, but it's a long article. But to summarize, essentially, they created a flag and they want to have a libertarian, independent country. Now, people were getting arrested going through, I forget which side they were going through to get there. But it has 400,000 would-be citizens. So they were saying initially it was a joke and people were laughing at it, but this guy had a vision of a libertarian paradise. It's like I said, patch of unwanted land and 400,000 would-be citizens that are backing this political movement. So it says, thanks to the efforts of the Croatian border police, they still haven't got a single inhabitant. I think they mean that sarcastically. So they're not letting people in there. They're stopping people from getting in. So I thought on the Serbian border that you could get in. And that's where, it's almost impossible to find a place to go to have any kind of freedom. Every country has, even they would have a government, and who knows what would happen if they had 4,000 people that moved in there. But they're trying to do something at least. And hopefully they will get people in there and be able to have a free society, and a society that essentially you can do whatever you want as long as you don't interfere with someone else's freedom or their property. And that's how it should be. Unfortunately, governments are in the business of laws. That's why, what do you think most politicians, or at least up to this point, most politicians were former lawyers or judges, well, judges are politicians, actually. They're failed lawyers that, they were bad as a lawyer and they couldn't make it, so they fucking ran to be a judge, is really what happened, because most of them are elected or they're appointed by another fucking politician. So I would, there's a bunch of articles on Liberland, so you could always look it up to find out some more information regarding Liberland. But what it's saying, and this is the most recent article I've seen, but I guess that nobody's technically there, that they don't have an inhabitant, but their plan is to create a libertarian society. And what it sounds like is that they want a society where, like I said, as long as you're not directly hurting anybody or interfering with their freedom or their property, then you have the right to do whatever you want. And that's really how it should be, until you had government becoming a parent. And along with, I had mentioned government schools being the other thing. Along with government schools, one of the other most important things is parenting. And I believe in peaceful parenting and radical unschooling. Essentially what I would call freedom parenting, letting your kids pretty much do what they want, but still being a parent who's there to advise them and actually be more involved than other parents, because you'd have to be. And I've talked about this in other shows, so I'm not going to go all into it now. But the future, I think, depends upon that, because I think too many kids are brought up like they're owned by their parents and they're just getting handed off to the government. And you look at what government schools are doing. It's not just government schools. It's also the kids' parents reinforce what government schools tell them. And government media does too. So essentially, I think we're at the point where there is no using the system to fight the system. There is no... well, if you vote the right people in, if you follow the Constitution, again, the Constitution does not give you real or true freedom and liberty. Although, depending on how you interpret the Ninth Amendment, it technically gives you more than what people recognize it gives you, because I believe that the Ninth Amendment protects your right to put what you want in your own body. Or... yeah, I would say protects your right, because that's a right that you're born with. Because the Ninth Amendment essentially says that just because it doesn't say specifically in the Constitution that you have the right to do something, that you don't have the right to do it. And that, I believe, was totally meant for things like drugs. And when the federal government passed that law, they violated the Constitution anyway, because drug laws are... per the Constitution, per the 10th Amendment, should be left up to the states. But the things that I think are this is what I believe are the only ways to achieve even some sort of freedom. One, of course, is by educating people, by talking to people, by, people doing shows like this or listening to shows like this, following more liberty-oriented media if you can find it, radio shows like Free Talk Live, reading liberty-oriented books, staying away from government media, getting your news and information more from the internet, from independent, trusted sites, checking your sources multiple times as well, because who knows what to believe when it comes down to it. But that's part of it, and that's the educational part, trying to unbrainwash people, trying to get people to listen to you, to open their minds, and trying to get rid of that government conditioning and living as free as possible. And there's ways to live freer, even though it's pretty hard for people to give up certain things, myself included. But along with that is how you parent your kids, homeschooling, bringing them up freely, letting them know that they own themselves, letting them make their own decisions. So when they grow up, they believe in freedom. They grow up with freedom. They grow up with rights, and they get accustomed to having those rights, and they're not going to let the government take them away from them. And those are things that I think are easier to do. None are illegal, neither, of course. And although CPS might try to get involved, and I wouldn't be surprised, and they shouldn't even exist, and they're fucking out of control. But the other things that I believe in is noncompliance, is not obeying these ridiculous laws. And if you get enough people to not obey a ridiculous law, they can't arrest everybody. So that, and it's something that's immediate. You don't have to ask the government's permission, because you look at changing a law, you got to go through so many fucking steps to get a law changed or get a law passed or get a law repealed. It's ridiculous. And the amount of time that it takes in the process, and asking the government for permission. Or you can just say, fuck it. You know what? You don't have the right to tell me that I have to do this. Like, say, put, what you want in your body. Or, one of the things I mentioned was take off your license plates. Say, fuck this, I have the right to travel. And if 20,000 people did it in your city, what are they going to do? Arrest everybody? And then at the same time, I do believe in self-defense. Just because you're a government agent doesn't mean you have the right to assault somebody and attack them and kidnap them for no reason. So I think if you're attacked by a government agent for no reason, that you have the right to defend yourself. And I hope it doesn't come to that. It would be better, like in the movie Panther, cops were beating up somebody. Some of the Black Panthers drove up. They got out with their guns, and they said, to stop beating them up. And then they asked them if it was loaded. I guess in California it wasn't legal. And then I just remember the scene. I don't know if this was true or not, but it was in the movie where he said no, it wasn't loaded, and then he loaded it. And then nothing happened except the police left and stopped beating the guy up. That's what I'd like to see happen. I'd like to see people stand up to government agents, and government agents realize that what they're doing is wrong and back off. Now, the problem is, I don't think they would do that. I think they would start shooting and killing people, the government agents, because they're pussies and they're too scared to, actually talk to somebody or talk things out. They just want to pull that trigger or beat somebody with a baton or zap somebody with a fucking stun gun. But I believe that if more people stood up, things would change. Now, people can say that, peace is the only way. And I don't believe in any aggression or any initiation of attacking anybody. Nobody should just be attacked. That's not right. But if you're being attacked, that's not right. And you have the right to defend yourself. And you have the right to not be kidnapped. As long as you didn't actually commit a real crime, like beat somebody or kill somebody or, steal their property or rape or something like that. You don't have the right to be kidnapped because you choose to put something in your body. And the police should fucking realize that. But people need to stand up. And people need to first understand. I mean, no one's going to stand up if they don't believe in something. And no one's going to believe in something that they don't know anything about. So really, the first thing is educating people. And that's what the government's scared of, because they know that the truth is on our side. That they are extortionists. That they do push stuff on people without their consent. That they do violate people's rights all the time. That they do want to control and exercise their power over people and control their lives by collecting all this data and violating their privacy. So that's what I think scares the government the most. I think that's why they went after Free Talk Live, the show Free Talk Live, which is the biggest true freedom and liberty-oriented show in the country on 160 stations. They claim that somebody from their office, I don't know where the case is at now, I haven't listened to the show in a while, but that went on a porn site that the FBI was running, a underage boys or something site that the FBI was actually running. They had shut it down. Well, they didn't shut it down. That was the whole thing. They had taken it over from somebody else and kept it up there. And then they claimed somebody from the studio went in and they confiscated like $15,000 worth of equipment. I think it was about shutting them down. Now, the show's been on a long time, so, you know, there was other things going on with the Free State Project and people making allegations about one of the hosts. And we actually talked about it on the show where I interviewed Rob Mathias. So you can find all the shows on the archives on Spreaker. But information is dangerous when people realize the truth. And I know it's hard for a lot of people to accept, and it's scary. And when you realize how fucked up the government is and the things they do and how they do things like commit false flags, meaning, you know, set up like the Boston bombing, I believe, was the government. And ISIS, I believe, is run by the CIA. And that's an easy one to really, you know, go through. And even the Boston bombing, there's so many issues with that. There's so many holes in it. It ain't even funny. And there was a document that came out as well that was unclassified, but they blacked so much stuff out. You know, even the biggest thing that always just comes up that's easy to mention is how they say they have the tape of the youngest brother dropping the backpack, but nobody's seen the tape, not even the governor of Massachusetts. But yet they show a tape of a man, the guy in a Navy Yard a couple years ago that shot up the Navy Yard. They show that tape of him shooting stuff up. Why didn't they show the tape of him dropping the backpack? They show tapes right before of them walking around. It's because it doesn't exist. So when you realize all these things, it's scary. And, you know, you can sit there and wait until it's too late, or you can start to do something about it. You can start to talk to people. You can start to read. You can take your kids out of government schools. You can start to educate them. Because really, if enough people know and decide not to comply, that's all you really need. And in the end, things will just implode on their own. That's why the people that talk about, you know, violent revolution and all that shit, I don't believe in any of that, because that doesn't do anything. That just gives you the same thing. and by people actually understanding and believing in everything and educating everybody and getting hearts and minds, that's where you ensure, at least for a certain amount of time, that it doesn't happen again. But by just, I don't believe violence is the answer. Like I said, I mean, I believe in self-defense. And when you're talking about a government that is based on violence, self-defense may come up. It may be something that you don't have any other options. But the real key is just the truth. And people just saying, we're not following any of this anymore. We're not doing any of this anymore. We're not sending our kids to these government schools anymore. And things just kind of implode on their own. But that's all we have for tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. I know I got a little frustrated tonight, I guess, so I was yelling a little, but I really look at, it's the damage that they've caused, and it's crazy. It's people that have died and had their lives ruined, and families that have. It's just, I don't know. Again, please read The Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balco if you haven't read it. It's definitely, and it's all true. There's no, he doesn't work on conspiracies or even theories. It's all factual, and a lot of it goes into the drug war, but it's based on the police in general, but a lot of it is a drug war, because that's where the police did a lot of their damage. That's why when I, talk about drugs, I talk about how important that is, that not just marijuana or not just cannabis, but all drugs, because it's more than just a drug. It's the rights or the I guess you'd call them the rights the police get, or the powers that the police are given by the government because of it, and it's bad. So we will be back tomorrow. Again, thanks everybody for listening. I know tonight wasn't the best show. I kind of put it together kind of quickly, so I apologize for that. But again, we'll be back tomorrow with hopefully a better show for you. So thanks again for tuning in. Peace.
But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest. We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law. enforcement. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is May 3rd, 2016. We are already into May now. Time goes by really fast, it seems. And we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and SoundCloud, as well as the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we're happy to hear from you. And you can reach us by phone at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you can Skype into the show. The username is Nonpartisan Liberty for all one word. Just send a contact request and your name and what you'd like to talk about. So I guess breaking news, I guess the first time we've had breaking news, because I don't really, I call it, I guess, a news and political show. At least that's the label I give it because it's the closest to what I guess the show is about. But we cover news as needed, really. It's more about ideas and things like that. But tonight, the primary in Indiana took place, and Donald Trump has won that and essentially is going to get the nomination for the Republican Party for president. Ted Cruz announced that he is suspending his campaign. So I heard Trump's speech, and it's like every other fucking speech that he's done. It's his arrogant, we have to win again, and in trade we got to win again, and in ISIS we got to win again, and this country's got to win again, and we're going to make this country great again, so we'll win again. And it's just the same bullshit that is really in every speech. It's like catchphrases or something. I don't know if that's just him doing that, off the cuff, that's or it's not a written speech. He just comes out there and says what he says. I would hope, because it sounds pretty bad. If somebody's writing that shit for him, then he has a terrible writer. But I heard he had issues with teleprompters. And unfortunately, Peter King, the representative from New York, is not going to take cyanide. He said he would take cyanide if Ted Cruz got the nomination. And he's a real dick who believes, like most congressmen do, of course, that he has the right to invade your privacy and violate all your rights, and that they need to do all these things to protect you against Al-Qaeda and ISIS and terrorism in general, that they need to do that by spying on you and violating all your rights. And that's really what we'll be talking about tonight. There's a couple stories that I do want to cover before we get to that, but really what we'll be talking about is all the surveillance, all the spying, all the tracking, and where it's going, and how it's leading to the government controlling every aspect of your life. And we've talked about this before, but not really in a sense of just putting everything together.
Ensures that no one really knows this covert bureau's true purpose. Number 9, Bohemian Grove. Every summer for about 150 years, this secretive California campground hosts a gathering of the most powerful men in the world, including Republican Presidents Richard Nixon and Herbert Hoover, who was among the first senior members known as the Old Guard. No women are allowed. The Bohemian pagan-themed entertainment has been compared to a college frat party and described as having, quote, an all-pervading sense of immaturity. The Elvis impersonators, the pseudo-pagan spooky rituals, the heavy drinking. So it actually sounds pretty fun, but just a little bit creepy. But get this, private meetings at this retreat were directly responsible for arranging the Manhattan Project. That's the project that led to the development of the atomic bomb. Number 8, Ise Grand Shrine. This ancient Shinto shrine is dedicated to Amaterasu, the goddess of the universe, and ancestor of the Japanese imperial family, whom are also responsible for providing the chief priestesses and priests that watch over the site. The inner shrine is said to contain a holy artifact, the sacred mirror of Amaterasu, an ancient symbol of the royal family representing wisdom and honesty. Over the centuries, it's been burned in fires, stolen, and even thrown into the ocean. But somehow it always recovered. It is, however, strictly off limits to the public, and only the imperial family have seen this actual mirror. So unless you're Japanese royalty watching my YouTube video, and if you are, please comment and let me know. There's basically no chance you're ever gonna get to see this thing. Number 7, the Mormon Church's secret vault. As if they didn't have enough secrets, blasted deep into the side of a granite mountain is a temperature and humidity controlled storage facility containing over 3 billion pages worth of data. For over 100 years, the Church of Latter-day Saints has been meticulously gathering and archiving genealogy records on most Americans. I'm not exactly sure why they do this, but they freely share the information online and give tours of the front of the vault, but the secret chambers deep within the mountain are strictly off limits. The church has a ritual to baptize people as Mormons without their permission, even after they're dead and even buried. And it seems that this is their zealous motive for keeping such detailed records on everyone. Comment if you also feel like this kind of reminds you of the NSA. Number 6, the Vatican Secret Archives. The Vatican Library contains one of the most significant collections of historical writings in the world. But 400 years ago, a secret archive was locked away. It is said to contain 52 miles of shelving. A limited reading list has been disclosed, which really makes you wonder what they really have back there. And qualified scholars may apply for an entry card to the index room, where they may study specific texts retrieved for them by a librarian, but no one else is allowed to access the actual vault, including the Japanese royal family. Number 5, White's Gentlemen's Club. This is the oldest and most exclusive gentlemen's club in England, whose members include royals, aristocrats, politicians, and businessmen, many whose fathers and grandfathers were members before them. The bar never closes, and the club's betting book contains records of ridiculous wagers going back hundreds of years, like 2 lords racing raindrops on a window pane. No women are allowed, but Queen Elizabeth II broke this 300-year-old rule by visiting the club in 1991. She was the only woman to ever do so, and never went back. The rest of us aren't allowed in the door of this snobby club either, but it doesn't really sound that interesting anyways. Okay, maybe it sounds a little bit interesting. Number 4, Moscow Metro number 2. A secret underground railway system runs deep beneath Moscow, connecting the Kremlin, former KGB offices, and presidential residences to deep underground command posts, a government airport, and also an underground city capable of sheltering 15,000 people from nuclear attack for up to, get this, 30 years. Built during the Cold War era, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had good reason to be paranoid that he might get nuked at any moment, and so he had this network of tunnels designed deep enough to survive the worst attacks. But officially it doesn't exist, so just forget everything I just said. Number 3, the Bilderberg Group. This annual meeting of the elite intellectuals more often than not includes heads of banks, business, and state rather than scholars. For 60 years, the private meetings have focused on policies in the United States and European Union. A meeting agenda is posted on their website, but no one really knows the closed-door deals that are really being made, since all attendees are sworn to secrecy. They've been accused of being the kingmakers of the Republican Party, Nazi warmongers, and evil dictators, intent on a new world order run by the banking system, which sounds kind of scary, probably because using money as a means of control sounds pretty feasible, but getting in to find out is not easy. Number 2, Disneyland's Club 33. If you thought the line in Small World was long, try getting a table at this magical 5-star restaurant where tableside animatronic birds know your name and the bathrooms have real thrones. Discreetly located at 33 Royal Street, above the Blue Bayou in New Orleans Square, a hidden panel conceals a buzzer, but you'd better have a reservation. The waiting list is about 14 years long, and the membership fee is $40,000 plus annual dues. Originally, it was conceived by Walt Disney.
Or mustard gas. I'm not an expert on gases, except maybe human gas. Not that I'm an expert on that neither. My own gas. But there were a number of innocent civilians in a town in Syria, or, a village or whatever, that were gassed by this sarin gas. And of course they showed the pictures, government media got involved and promoted the fuck out of it, or propagandized the fuck out of it, because that's what they do. So they had said Assad did it. That's back when Obama said a year before that, I'm drawing a line in the sand, and my red line, if it gets his own people, then we're gonna attack. That's when he almost sounds like fucking Yogi Bear, at least my impression. I've said that before. Hey, boo-boo, get some picnic baskets, bring them to the White House. So they, and they still bring this up about his red line, even though it's just, it reminds me of 1984. Those that aren't familiar, 1984 was a book written by George Orwell, where essentially the government controlled everything, and the main character even was, what was he, the minister of, I forget his exact name, but what he did was he changed misinformation or information, but basically it was, he changed history. He'd write whatever they want the story to be, and that's kind of what they do now. So you still have people bringing this up, but they fail to mention that even though he said that, his red line was not crossed. So it got down to the point where, and they had said, oh, we're just going to do something little. Secretary of State, Kerry was already the Secretary of State at that point, had said, yeah, we're just going to shoot a missile or do something small, and come to find out that later when they investigated, at first they were going to do all this before they even investigated who did it. They were going to do it that weekend, and I believe it happened during the week because I remember following this very closely. And during that weekend, they almost did it. But what happened was, this is one example, and there's not many. I think the the bill on guns is another example where people actually stopped it from happening. And there's not a lot of things that I think the public has the ability to stop from happening. But, and they only really stopped it because it made Obama think, not that he couldn't have gotten away with it or done it anyway, but he was like, ah, shit, I'm going to fucking look bad. So it was more about that and his legacy and him just looking bad. So people just went nuts and called their Congress people and were like, what the fuck? There's going to be another war. And we don't even know where the gas came from, if it came from the so-called rebels. I wouldn't call them rebels. To me, rebel is a term of respect, and rebels are people that are respected. They're fighting against some sort of tyranny. Otherwise, they're just terrorists or criminals or whatever you want to call them. But he was so close to doing it, and I really believe because all the calls that Congress was getting, and Obama was going to do it without getting permission from Congress, that he was like, fuck. I mean, nothing would have happened, but he would have looked bad. And I think he didn't want to mess with his legacy as well as have that as another criticism against him. So what they ended up doing was finally bringing in investigators from the UN, which of course took a while, to try to figure out where it came from. And it turns out that it came from the rebels, or the people they were calling the rebels or the terrorists. And it did not come from Assad. And they were going to attack him over that. And we've talked about this before on the show, that, but also the fact of why they want Assad out of there. Because if you followed anything with Syria and Obama, it's always been about getting Assad out. They keep talking about getting him out. Now, I don't have enough of a background on Assad to say how bad he is. I know that he's not he's more secular than basically anybody I can think of that's left in the Middle East. He's not a ruler who rules by Muslim law. When you see him, I mean, he dressed. I originally wasn't going to do a show tonight. I was going to take the night off, but I decided to do one last minute. And so I'm not as prepared as I'd like to be, but this is something that I'm pretty familiar with anyway when it comes to all the things that they're doing. And the reason I had thought of it was because what they're doing with pills now, and we'll get into that a little later, how they're able to track pills through technology within the pill. And that's kind of scary. Not kind of scary, it's very scary. All the technology that they have is scary because what they're using it for. Of course, technology can be a positive thing. I mean, it can be used in a way that helps people in so many different ways, depending on what the technology is. But when you have the government developing a lot of this technology or investing in it, where they have their front companies or they're donating money, so they're involved in a lot of the stuff, or they're buying up patents, whatever it might be, and they're essentially claiming rights to all this stuff anyway, if they want to. Anything that is developed in the United States, I mean, they can do whatever they want with it. If they want to take it and use it for national security purposes. That's really all they got to do is claim national security. But what I want to do is play this clip about the pills. It's actually pretty short. And then I'm going to play a clip on the top 10 secret places you can't go. That has to do with secret, I guess, government storage facilities and beyond. So we're going to play that. And when we come back, I'm going to go through some of the stories that I've been wanting to go through. And then we'll get into all the ways that the government is tracking people and the pills now being a new way among other ways, and things that you could possibly do about it. And none of them have anything to do with the government, of course. The system is gone. It's done. It doesn't matter who gets elected. It's all rigged. So having Trump in there, he definitely made a deal with the powers that be. Although I believe Hillary made a deal to actually become the next president. So I think that is going to be the next president, but it doesn't matter who ends up winning. Whoever ends up winning, we're fucked. It's totally irrelevant, and neither give a shit about freedom. And if you listen to what they say, it's pretty obvious. So we will be right back after this. Again, if you'd like to call in, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or Skype in. Nonpartisan Liberty for All is the username, all one word. And you can get all that information at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and more. That's nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And we will be back after this.
Pill Drill is a nifty device that assists you by tracking when you've taken or forgot to take your medication. It works by tracking one's gestures. Simply wave the pill bottle in front of the sensor and your pill will be marked as taken. While not exactly exciting, Pill Drill is extremely important. The CDC states that 1 in 5 prescriptions is never filled, and nearly 50% of those that do fill their prescriptions don't take their medication properly. The CDC also estimates that this causes 125,000 deaths a year. Hopefully with Pill Drill, dubbed the Fitbit for pills, will remedy this.
You will never be allowed to visit any of these magical places. Feel excluded? Me too. From yearly frat parties with government leaders to massive Mormon archives the church keeps tightly hidden away, except for a small part that contains information they've mysteriously been collecting on everyone in the world, to a place that has the most mysterious of reasons to continue operating even today, yet getting close to it will cause you immediate death. These are the top 10 most secret places you will never be allowed to visit. Number 10, Room 39. It's believed to be a $5 billion government organization dedicated to criminal activities such as meth and heroin production, counterfeiting, fraud, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking. This secretive office is thought to be located in Pyongyang, I can't say their capital city's name, near the residence of Kim Jong-un, Supreme Leader of North Korea, as everyone knows. The extreme isolation of the country as a whole, combined with the iron-fisted security of Kim's family dynasty, and as a perk to attract investors, but it rapidly became one of America's most exclusive clubs, and the only place in Disneyland that serves alcohol. And finally, number 1, Area 51. After all these years, it is still the most mysterious of secret places. Originally established by the CIA for the development of experimental aircraft, the area is permanently off limits both to civilian and normal military air traffic. Who knows what technology is stored and studied deep in the mountain beneath this top secret U.S. Air Force base? Perhaps it's extraterrestrial in nature, as many believe. Or perhaps it's man-made and far beyond even what we could imagine. Take into consideration that in around 1960, which is about 55 years ago, they successfully developed stealth aircraft technology here, and that's not a small achievement. Yet, even during modern times of relative peace, the base is still being used for something. Whatever it is, they really don't want anyone to know though, as the area is surrounded by cameras with infrared and motion sensing capabilities that allow snipers, which also surround the base 24/7, to kill you for even being in range of the perimeter of the base. A friend of mine was actually driving near the area when her and her friend's cell phones both immediately and simultaneously turned off for no reason, only to mysteriously turn back on again sometime later, as if they were being controlled remotely. Officially, they refused to acknowledge that the base even existed for almost 60 years, but unofficially, workers have reported testing alien spacecraft and viruses with the help of a telepathic alien named J-Rock. Stop what you're doing right now. I need to tell you something. Watch our top 10 Mysteries of the Internet video. You will never be allowed to visit any of these
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com is our website where you can check that out. One of the stories that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, well, not that long, maybe a week, and it happens to fit perfectly into what we're talking about today is, well, actually there's a couple of them, but one of the ones I was just going to talk about that I just lost was the replacing cash and going cashless. But so I want to talk about that article as well as the pill article. It sounded like the clip wasn't the pills that they ingest that have technology or some kind of technology within the pill, that it was the technology before that, but I'm not sure. That was a really quick clip, but we will talk about the article about the pills as well. But before we get to that, there is one article that is not related to our topic tonight that I did want to talk about for a couple weeks now. And that's, I hate how they name it this, but boots on the ground. There's boots on the ground. What if they're wearing shoes? I don't know. I usually wear boots. Actually, if I'm not at work, I'm usually wearing boots. And sometimes I'm even wearing boots at work a couple days a week. So, but this was from a couple weeks ago, and I just never got to it, or maybe a week ago. But it's funny because I wish I had the clip. So after claiming, I don't know how many times, no boots on the ground, and it's funny, on RT, the headline, and this is from April 25th, so it's not that long ago. The headline was, "No boots on the ground in Syria, but U.S. troops wearing boots and on ground there." So after, I do actually have a clip here that I could play. After saying for I don't know how long that there will be no boots on the ground, I'm not going to put troops in Syria, what did they do? They put troops in Syria because ultimately they still want Assad. Now, whether the troops, and I know some of them are special forces, have a mission other than ISIS, which I'm sure they do, and that's probably to get Assad. The whole reason behind this thing, and what's fucked up is people are still saying that Assad gassed his own people. So as far as, and for those who don't know, Assad is I think they refer to him as the president of Syria is his title, but he's the head of state in Syria. And it's got to be 2 years ago now, there was sarin gas